everyone. I think at the very last segment I did a couple of months ago, actually, I finished at the Cenozoic Climate, and I just realized I haven't finished this, so here am I. What can we use for studying paleoclimate? This is kind of an important things to learn about because it's kind of interesting. I really truly believe so. The first thing we can use is actually really interestingly is the shape of the leaves. During the warmer times, the leaves are having much smoother edges, like on this one, as you can see. And during the colder climate, when the climate is cooler, usually the leaves have very sharp low edges, like on this one. So that's one indication about the climate. There are actually even better indicators, such as the isotopes. Probably you do remember because we learned it in physical geology, but also in historical geology, that the oxygen has two isotopes. Remember, oxygen has 8 protons, and actually some cases it has 8 neutrons. And if the proton number is 8 and the neutron number is 8, that is going to give you 16 for the mass number. So we call that one oxygen 16. Now the other guy is when the oxygen has 8 proton and 10 neutron. So this guy is a little bit heavier because instead of 8 neutron, it has 10. So that is the oxygen 18. Now, the other thing I would want to tell you that the little thing we can use to tell the oxygen isotope ratio is the foraminifers. Remember, we learned those little one-celled organisms? The foraminifers actually are calcium carbonate, CaCO3, O3, so they have oxygen. And if you take, if you drill a borehole into deep ocean sediment, like every centimeter will actually hold a whole lot of foraminifers. So therefore, like every so often you can do the foraminifer study and see what is the isotope composition in that sample. If you look at the ratio of the so-called light and heavy oxygen, light is the oxygen 16, heavy is the oxygen 18, you can kind of tell what the climate was like. Because just think about it. What if we have an ice age? That just would mean that you have less water in the water cycle, sometimes much less. So what's happening at those times with the sea level? Yeah, it's going down. And when that happens, we don't have much moisture in the air. We don't have much water in the water cycle. So therefore, the climate is more arid, logically. When it's arid, what happens with the ocean water? Arid climate, the water from the ocean is evaporating. And as it evaporates, which isotope will go? The water is H2O. So every molecules of water which evaporates will take an oxygen with it. So which oxygen it's going to take? That's the question. Logically, it will take the 16 because that's lighter. It won't be able to take the 18 because it's heavier. So therefore, when the climate is dry, the ratio of the oxygen 16-18 is toward the 18 because it stays back in the ocean since the 16 is evaporates. On the other hand, when the weather is interglacial, which means no glaciation during that time, then it's much more moist. There is more water in the water cycle. So therefore, the climate becomes more humid. And when that happens, what will you see? What will you experience? Yeah, a lot of rain. And when it rains, the oxygen 16 comes back. So therefore, the oxygen 16 ratio is going to go toward the oxygen 16 because the rain brought it back. So therefore, it's very logical if you just go into those sediments, you can make a very, very detailed paleoclimate study by using the oxygen isotopes. Remember, the water molecule itself has an oxygen, so you can look at the isotope ratio, and the carbonate which forms there, the calcium carbonate, also have oxygen. So it's very easy to do these isotope studies. So that's the isotope studies, and you should know it because I will ask about the oxygen isotopes. And right here you can see the low foraminifers. Remember, every single one of these are calcium carbonate, so they have oxygen in them. So you can study the oxygen 1618. And here this shows you the curve which they made based on the oxygen isotope studies. And the yellow would show you the warmer periods, and the blue would show you the cooler periods. So you can see how sensitive the foraminifers are. So you can really do a very, very detailed study on the isotopes. This low figure just shows you when it's interglacial and you have the 16 coming back, and when it's glacial, the 18 stays and the oxygen 16 goes up. So I already kind of explained it to you. The other possibility to study the paleoclimate is the ice core. As you can see, like, there has been a bunch of ice core drilled into Antarctica's ice, and they took the samples of the ice, and actually they keep it in New York sometimes, but the geologists are working in labs under 0 degrees Celsius because otherwise the ice would melt. As you can see, the ice is very cyclic. And that is like dust coming from other parts of the world by the wind. So there are times when much more particle gets into the ice. The other thing we can actually study is the fluid inclusion in the ice, because as the ice grows, the faster it goes, the more fluid inclusions are going to be preserved there. So after going through this, let's talk about the Cenozoic climate. The Cenozoic starts with a very warm period, the Eocene. The average global temperature during the Eocene was 18 degrees Celsius. We have black shale, which means global black shale. That means that there was no ice age, the world was globally warm, and we didn't have oceanic circulation, so black shale was forming. The sea level was relatively high. Scientists believe that this was caused by the fact that there was very, very active mid-oceanic ridge all around the world, and it produced enough CO2 to maintain the warmer climate. After the late Eocene, there was a dramatic change. In as low as 15 million years, the average temperature dropped more than 10 degrees Celsius. This is a whole bigger drop, actually. And by the end of this episode, Earth turned from a greenhouse time to an icehouse time. The polar glaciers started to form, and big temperature difference formed between the equator and the pole. That started very vigorous oceanic currents everywhere. And by the middle Oligocene, Antarctica built up a huge ice cap, and that caused a big drop in the sea level. And the reason for this whole thing is that Australia and Antarctica started to break apart, and Antarctica have moved to the South Pole, which sets up Earth for an ice age. So by the middle Oligocene, the sea level have dropped majorly. And this just shows you that the reason for the glacial time is that not only that there is a continent at the land pole, which is very important because having a continent at the pole, when it's snowing, the snow will accumulate on the continent, and then it becomes white, and the albedo is a characteristic measurement of how much of the sunlight is being actually absorbed by the surface, or how much of it have been refracted back into the atmosphere. And when it's white, obviously, when the sun hits the white, just about all of it refracts right back. So therefore, it just stays cold and cannot really melt or anything. About this time, actually, the northward migration of Africa will block off the entrance of the Tethys. Uh, Actually, really, that's the remnant of the Tethys. Now we call it Mediterranean. And as Africa is moving northward, actually it produces the Strait of Gibraltar. But at one time, it almost completely closed it away. And so basically, we have like a teeny tiny Mediterranean Sea, which is basically landlocked. And it didn't get much water from the Atlantic Ocean. So therefore, the water started to evaporate because remember it's ice age, so the water evaporates and heavier oxygen stays back. But as the water evaporates, actually the salt starts to precipitate. A lot of this people believe that actually during this time, basically the whole Mediterranean have dried up. And then about 5.3 million years ago, the normal seawater returns, and it happened really, really quickly, actually. But right before, basically, huge salt desert formed, and there was like a bunch of very hypersaline lakes around it. We have a whole lot of salt on the bottom of the Mediterranean, which is relates to this Messinian salinity crisis. It's kind of interesting. And this here is the mineral resources of the Cenozoic. We have oil shale, which is good for 10 gallon of oil per ton of rock. We have them in Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. We have evaporates, trona, and phosphate. Trona is basically the guano in caves in Florida. And we have the Miocene Bone Valley. We have lignite. Remember, the coal formation is gradual, and the very first, the second, peat is the least quality coal, and lignite is the next one. It still has like 75% carbon and about 25% ash. And then we have a lot of the reservoir rocks forming in the Persian Gulf, Gulf of Mexico, and of course in the Middle East. So these are the important geologic resources. And the Cenozoic life. The mammals, of course, replace the reptiles as the very dominant land animal, and therefore the Cenozoic often called the age of mammals. It also could be called the age of flowering plants because angiosperms came to dominate the earth. Angiosperms, or flowering plants with covered seed, replaced gymnosperms as the dominant land plants. Of course, when you have covered seed, it's much more safe than the seed is just not covered and just either happens or not happens. So this is much more safe, just like the mammals. When you have your baby in your belly until it's capable of life on itself, is much more safe than like an egg, which could be eaten by anybody. Of course, the development of the flowering plants are strongly influenced the evolution of birds and mammals, because the flowering plants are depend on the birds and the butterflies and all those, the bees, to be able to survive and fertilize. As I already kind of told you, the mammals replace the reptiles because the mammals are warm-blooded, where the reptiles are cold-blooded. They actually could adapt to the colder environment, and they could search for food during any season or any time of the day. They also adopted insulating body hair and more efficient lungs and hearts. So these were very important steps for the in the fact that the mammals took over from the reptiles. So these I actually allowed the mammals to live much more actively than the reptiles did. You know, as soon as it got cold, the reptiles slowed down and unable to do anything basically. So their development and specialization took four principal directions. They increased in size because remember at the beginning the mammals were itty bitty, and now they are much bigger. Uh, their brain capacity got bigger. They specialized their teeth to fit certain diets, and they specialized their limbs to particular environments. So these were very important steps in the evolution. Uh, in the marine environment, some organisms survived the Cretaceous mass extinction, and so there was not that much change in the ocean. The forests have started to dominate the land, and when the climate started to cool, grass appeared also, which actually helped in the diversification of a lot of different mammals. During the Oligocene, the climate continued to get drier and cooler. So the grasses become more favorable, and there was a bunch of cone-bearing and hardwood trees. The earlier types of mammals become extinct, and larger species flourished as the climate got colder. We had deer, pigs, horses, camel, cats, and dogs. During the Ice Age, as the climate began to cool and new animals evolved, such as the mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, and the modern humans right here during the Ice Age. And this is just a very interesting thing in Russia, Berezovka, Russia. In the ice, they did find a baby mammoth. And it was really interesting because when they opened its tummy and the content of its stomach, you could actually plant the seeds. The mammoth was eating some kind of plants and it had seeds, and they could plant the seeds and actually grow those plants, which is really, really interesting. And then this shows you the humans. The most important thing was about becoming human is the bipedal locomotion. The first bipedal human-like primates appeared about 6 million years ago during the late Miocene. The earliest modern humans appeared about 195,000 years ago. The migration was definitely influenced by the Ice Age. As the sea level dropped, the humans could migrate from place to place. When sea level is higher, they couldn't. One of the very important one was the Bering Strait, and this is how they most likely walked across to North America. And I guess I'm gonna finish right here and continue with the quaternary in the next segment. I will see you.